True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Mary Yoder was a beloved wife, mother, and a chiropractor, apparently living her best life. In 2015, she and her husband Bill, who ran their own chiropractic practice together, were planning on retiring and finally taking their dream trip to Europe. But on July 20th, Mary didn't seem like herself. She left work, complaining of an upset stomach and intractable vomiting. By the following morning, she was intubated and in the ICU. Join us at the quiet end for Inside Job. Doctors caring for Mary in the hospital were really puzzled by her sudden severe illness. Within 36 hours, she had 7 episodes of cardiac arrest. Her family came to be by her side, but the outcome was devastating. Mary Yoder was dead. Toxicology studies found a poison in Mary's blood, solving the medical mystery. But the investigation into how and why she had ingested the poison had just begun.
So we have a New York beer for a New York case, and I picked one from Ithaca Beer Company called Flower Power. So this is an American IPA, 7.2% alcohol by volume. Beer is a hazy copper color, small white head, a lot of lacing to the glass, nice aroma, sweet malt, citrus, and pine. And the taste follows the nose, as you so much like to say, Jill.
Yes.
Caramel, grapefruit, and pine. This is a more malt-forward IPA rather than a hop-forward, so it's not as rip-your-mouth-off type of stuff.
Yeah, a little less hoppy than we're used to, really.
Yes, but still a nice beer.
Yes, it'll do, as they say.
It'll do.
So let's open her up. It is a pretty beer. Very pretty. So I'll give it that.
It's decorative, yeah.
And it smells good. So follow me down here to the quiet end, and I think I can pound down a couple of these while you tell the story of Mary Yoder. This story really kind of blew me away, I have to be honest.
Well, I have a lot of questions about it.
There's so many twists and so many questions, and I'm not even sure that the outcome was correct.
Yeah.
So you could say it's solved, but then you could say, is it? We'll see.
I think we will.
So I'm going to have you start us out. Give us a little history of this family where this tragedy occurred in New York.
Mary Yoder was born Mary Bakert. She grew up in Utica, New York, with 2 brothers and 5 sisters. Big family.
Yeah, isn't it?
She was an adventurous child and had many hobbies, including music, yoga, and singing. She was a smart, active kid. Now, after high school and then 2 years in a community college, she wanted to continue her education at the University of Buffalo. She had an aunt and uncle who lived near the university, so she moved into their house. After that arrangement got a little bit old, Mary rented a room in a boarding house that Bill Yoder and his classmates were renting. Mary was likable, and she just exuded kindness. But when Bill met Mary, it wasn't love at first sight, because Mary was kind of on the shy side, plus she had a boyfriend. And Bill just wasn't the kind of guy to make a move on another guy's girlfriend. So early on, Mary and Bill were just friends and roommates.
Yes. So as Bill got to know Mary, though, he began to think that she was really someone exceptional. Her caring and optimistic attitude were just part of who she was. Not too long after Mary moved into the boarding house, she announced that she and her boyfriend had broken up. So Bill had to admit that made him kind of happy. And within a month, he asked Mary out on a date. She accepted, and as they say, the rest is history, really.
Yeah, so there must have been some mutual attraction to begin with. I mean, she just moves into the boarding house and then, wow, I broke up with my boyfriend?
Yeah, Well, she just seemed like she was the kind of person who just had this kindness and happiness and just joie de vivre about her. Kind of envious of someone like that. She just really seemed to go out there and enjoy life. She didn't sit around and think negative things.
No, she went for it.
She absolutely did, yes. And I think that was good for Bill, who was much quieter and more introspective.
Bill grew up in Phoenix, and after high school and then a 3-year overseas journey courtesy of the U.S. Army, he returned to the United States and he lived in Buffalo, New York. Bill had friends in the philosophy graduate program at the University of Buffalo, and he moved into a boarding house with them near the campus. Now, besides paying a share of the rent, Bill contributed by doing chores and just kind of helping out with the maintenance of the building. His plan at the time was to complete his doctorate and get his dissertation out of the way. Beyond that, Bill wasn't sure what career he would pursue, although teaching was always a possibility.
Yeah, so I guess eventually Bill's academic advisor called him in for a meeting. It was explained to him that, after 7 years in grad school, he still wasn't able to teach and there were no classes left for him to take. So he really needed to leave or get that dissertation written and finish his degree. But Bill had really put it off, so he approached Mary with this idea. He wanted to travel out west. Mary was studying for her bachelor's degree, but she really wanted to be with Bill, and she knew she could transfer credits and continue her studies just about anywhere. So they sold most of their possessions at a garage sale, leaving with only what they could fit into Bill's car. They really had no concrete plans, but they were young, in love, and just really open to having some new experiences. It was the 1970s, so this adventure wasn't that unusual for a young couple. They were free-spirited and unattached to anything but one another, so they decided to make their first stop in Arizona. Bill wanted to introduce Mary to his family, and after that, they could go wherever they wanted. They discussed the kind of place where they'd like to settle down. Some place with a university, so Mary could continue taking her classes. Some place not too big, but not isolated either. Mary suggested Seattle, Washington, or Portland, Oregon. But they liked to be warm and enjoy year-round sunshine. So after they visited Arizona, they bought a small 2-person tent, loaded up their car, and they moved east to Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Practically neighbors.
Yeah.
Once they got to Albuquerque, Bill and Mary found an RV and camping park. Now, they set up their tent, but it was not the best constructed tent. It was actually quite cheap. And they got into a downpour, one of those storms that we have around here where you get like 3 inches in an hour. So the tent flooded, all their belongings were drenched, and that was it for the tent. Then the next day they drove into Albuquerque, and they rented a small adobe house. In order to support themselves, they both worked at a local Pizza Hut. So Bill was working on a book, and that meant Mary would work when he was writing. And then when Mary needed to study, Bill worked. Pretty nice arrangement, job sharing.
Yeah.
And it did work for a while, but neither of them saw it as a permanent solution. So after about a year, Bill proposed, and Mary accepted. And then they returned to Utica.
Yeah, after some time back in Utica, the now married Bill and Mary Yoder went for an extended honeymoon to Kauai, Hawaii. They'd barely enough money to live on, really, but what they did is they filled up 2 backpacks with necessities, used what money they had to get flights to Hawaii, and then once they landed, they just started hiking. They spent their nights in different public campgrounds as they made their way to a remote area on the north side of the island's coast, and this is the Kalalau Valley. Bill and Mary hiked in, and they found a really beautiful spot close to the beach, overlooking a waterfall, so they were thrilled. This was just like living in paradise for them. And they stayed there for about a month. According to Bill, they were really focused on a spiritual path. They were searching for a deeper, more meaningful life. Their marriage vows said that they were committed to each other, but they were also committed to love itself. They wanted to service the community and contribute to improving the world. So with this lifestyle they were living without many distractions, life was moving slowly. But after a while, Bill decided he really needed to finish his dissertation. He was going to need a career eventually.
Yes, he was. So they moved back to Buffalo and eventually from there to Utica. Mary got pregnant. So Bill rode 3 different bus lines, transferring twice daily to the library to work on his dissertation. Bill was there from open to close most every day. He planned to finish his doctorate a month before the baby was due, and he did. So their first child was a daughter they named Liana. And 2 years later, another daughter, Tamarin, was born. Their third child, a son they named Adam, was not going to be born for another 10 years. When he came along, the girls were old enough to really appreciate him and actually help care for him. And he certainly got a lot of attention in the family.
Well, yeah, being the baby in the family is one thing, but when you've got such a big age gap between the older children and the baby, it's like having extra parents and really being the center of attention.
So when they were first back in Utica, Bill and Mary lived with her parents for a while. Then Bill got a job teaching at Vassar in Poughkeepsie. But he didn't really like that. He just didn't feel he was doing what he was meant to do, or what he wanted to do for himself. Then he went to a job fair and he met 3 men from Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina. They talked, got along really well, and they invited Bill to come to the university for a visit. He visited and he got really excited about it. It had a country club-like atmosphere that impressed him and he felt comfortable. And he was offered a teaching job. So he took it, they moved south, and Bill could start teaching. For 3 years he loved his job and he earned good money. Mary had Tamarin in 1980, and she was busy with the 2 girls. The next summer, Bill had a conversation with another old friend who was in chiropractic school. Bill was intrigued, and he talked with his friend about how the field was heading. They felt that chiropractic medicine was being more clearly understood and accepted by people overall. Bill and Mary talked about it and decided that chiropractic practice was a field offering the opportunity for Bill to put his beliefs together and have a productive career. Becoming a chiropractor felt like a natural fit to how the Yoders were choosing to live their lives. For Bill, it seemed like the ideal balance of mind, body, and spirit.
So if you haven't noticed, there is a bit of a pattern here of Mary following Bill. I'm not saying that that's necessarily negative, but I do think it's an aspect of their relationship worth noting. He seemed to kind of be leading the way.
Well, I certainly see that. I mean, it seems like the decisions they made were what he wanted.
Mostly, yeah.
And she went along with him.
Sure. Which isn't that unusual for the generation that they were raised in. But for someone independent like her, I do have to wonder if maybe there was a little resentment later down the road. But by the time all this happened, Bill was in his mid-30s. And as he thought about chiropractic work, he opened the newspaper and he read the Dear Abby column, which he read just about every morning. And the question of the day was from a writer who was 35 and had always wanted to go to medical school. But it would take 8 years to complete.
Well, 4 years for medical school.
Well, it must be someone who didn't have an undergrad degree.
Maybe they needed undergrad, or they're talking about residency.
Yes, we don't need to get into the particulars.
Okay.
The point here is the person was 35 and they knew it was going to be into their 40s by the time they would have a career. So the writer was worried about this. The writer was worried about being 43 after getting a medical degree. And this really, kind of hit home with Bill, who had a concern about that if he became a chiropractor. But Abby, in her response, had said to the writer, "How old will you be in 8 years if you don't attend medical school?" So Bill had kind of an aha moment with that. He said, "Thank you, Abby. I knew I was reading you for a reason all these years."
Well, it's a pretty good answer, actually.
I like that answer, actually. Yeah. So Bill decided to go ahead and go to chiropractic school. And of course, Mary was very supportive. In fact, she decided she'd become a chiropractor as well, and they could share a practice, which is a nice idea.
Well, and they've done that in other jobs. They job shared
Pizza Hut.
At the pizza place.
I'd say that's a little different, but yeah.
Well, yes, I wasn't comparing them, just saying that they were used to it. They knew how to do job sharing and make it work.
Yeah, so they were super close. They must have been, because they're kind of sharing everything in their lives. So Bill finished 1 year before Mary because he had more science classes completed, and he taught at the South Carolina College, while Mary completed her studies. One or the other would always be home with the kids, so they didn't have the expense or the worry of childcare. Once they both had their degrees, they moved back to Utica, and that's when they started their own practice.
Now, Bill and Mary wanted to give their kids a traditional family life with large gatherings and busy holidays. When they wrote out their business plan, they noticed that all of the chiropractic centers in town were clustered in one part of Utica. So they placed a pin on a map of the town and wisely chose a location away from the other chiropractic businesses. They rented an office building from an owner who was willing to remodel it for Bill and Mary's needs. And after they opened their practice, philosophy became a major part of what they wanted to share with their patients. Bill believed the chiropractic work didn't just focus on taking patients' pain away. It was more about wellness. So their new careers seemed ideal for them, and they became pretty popular in the area. They had many satisfied clients.
So their oldest daughter, Liana, grew up to go to med school, and she became a general practitioner. Tamarin got her associate's degree, and she moved to Cooperstown, New York. After their youngest, Adam, graduated from high school in 2007, he enrolled in the Mohawk Valley Community College, where he studied digital animation and theater for 2 years. But Adam hadn't been really successful in college. What he would do is he would enroll and then drop out. Being disciplined enough to study and do well just didn't come easily to him. In the fall of 2012, after re-enrolling in college, Adam dropped out for the second time. But he still didn't give up on earning a degree. Bill and Mary really stressed the importance of education. So Adam discovered SUNY Polytech in the fall of 2014 to be the best college for him, and he enrolled and recommitted himself to his studies. Adam met his girlfriend, Katie Conley, at her high school graduation party in 2011, and they were introduced by a mutual friend. Adam was quite shy, but Katie was attractive and very easy to talk to, and they were attracted to each other from the start. There seemed to be a strong emotional and physical connection, and by the end of that summer, Adam and Katie were dating exclusively. But they began a tumultuous relationship with many ups and downs. They had an intense sexual chemistry, but they also had outrageous arguments. So it probably wasn't the best relationship for the long haul.
I don't think so. Too many peaks and valleys. So early on, though, Adam was open about how quickly his feelings for Katie had developed and progressed. Katie grew up in Utica, where her father was a property owner and a landlord. And the Conley name was popular and pretty respected around town. Adam kept a notebook of poetry and writings, expressing how much he loved Katie. In one entry, Adam talked about how, when Katie wasn't around, all he could do was sit and stare at pictures of her and wonder if she felt the same about him. It was an intoxicating feeling, he wrote. So as they continued dating, seeing each other every day, Adam wrote out the costs of a shared house, monthly bills, and what they could and couldn't afford. So it looked like they were planning a life together.
It really did, but when Adam and Katie argued and fought, according to Adam's apology letters to Katie, these fights were very brutal and loud. They'd hurt each other and then they'd make up. In an undated letter to Katie after one of these arguments, Adam wrote that they acted crazy because they were crazy in love. So that's, a pretty immature way to look at things. But they were both guilty of saying really cruel things to each other. And Adam had told her he didn't want these fights to destroy their relationship. So beginning in 2013, Adam was the Yoder's office manager. But by the end of that year, he'd returned to school and he just couldn't manage a full-time job. And he asked his parents if his girlfriend, 20-year-old Katie, could split the time with him. They would each work part-time, sharing the office manager responsibilities. So in early 2014, as school became more time-consuming, Adam stopped working at the office completely, and he suggested that Katie could take over full-time office manager responsibilities. She was doing a very good job. And Mary and Bill liked Katie. She was a friendly, pretty young woman. She was also really responsible and smart for her age. She looked sophisticated, dressing in a businesslike way, and most people around town knew the Conley family. The house where she grew up was on acres of land where they raised horses. Most who knew Katie would describe her as soft-spoken and wholesome. Bill and Mary had gotten to know Katie as she dedicated herself to their practice. Now before that, they didn't know much about her. Adam had always been a really private person, so they didn't really know Katie until she came to work for them. And he wasn't one to share what was going on in his relationship with his parents very much.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yes.
So when they weren't fighting, Katie seemed to make Adam happy. There were certainly bumps throughout the relationship, but Mary and Bill cared for and trusted Katie. But at the same time, the idea of them getting married was not something Bill and Mary predicted, and they certainly didn't encourage it. They felt that the relationship was too up and down. Now, at first, they'd been reluctant to hire Katie full-time because they didn't want to have any relationship issues coming into the office. A family-run business was certainly difficult enough. But Adam begged his parents, telling them what a good job Katie would do and how she'd focus on work while in the office. He promised that, so they agreed to hire her.
So Bill had cut down his hours as a chiropractor during the summer of 2015, and he began focusing on doing the taxes, accounting, and payroll. So he did work 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and a half day when he could fit it in. He still saw some patients, but he saw fewer and fewer as his time to retire was coming up. Mary worked the other days of the week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And Mary often drove out to nearby Amish country on some days after work hours to provide treatment to the Amish. The horse and buggy trip into Utica was too far for them, and Mary didn't want them to miss out on treatments that she felt they really needed. So she was willing to do that.
Was she supportive of his plan to retire?
Well, they both wanted to retire, but I think money was an issue.
Yeah, we're going to get into that later, but money was a big issue.
Yes, because I think they were hoping to get a certain amount of money for the practice. But by this time, Bill was working on writing books, and Mary was the major bread earner.
Right.
So I think there probably were some issues there between them over this. But their family would say they were planning to retire, and they were actually planning a big trip as well. Both gardening and pottery were big hobbies for Mary, and she also became a Shakely company rep, selling their products out of the office. Mary kept a small shop where she sold some of her pottery, health-related books, and some herbal supplements in the back of her office. And she always encouraged friends and patients to live a healthy lifestyle. Mary's default lunch on days she had forgotten to bring one from home was a Shakely protein shake. So she kept a large canister of Shakely protein powder in the office refrigerator, and she would mix it with almond milk to make a smoothie when she got hungry. Mary was very trim and fit and active. For a 60-year-old woman, she just didn't look anywhere near 60 to me. Very fit.
Yeah, that picture you showed me, she looked good.
She looked really good. So that summer of 2015, things seemed close to perfect for Bill and Mary. They were really looking forward to retirement and traveling, and they were dividing up the work week. Katie was doing a really good job managing the office, and Adam was back in school. So that made Mary and Bill happy as well.
Things looked pretty good then.
They did. I mean, I think Adam was always a bit of a worry, so they were really happy when he was returned to school full-time.
Yeah, but the whole thing with Katie, she was working out really well for their practice, doing a great job.
Yeah.
That's good.
It was very good.
Now, throughout early summer and into July, Mary and Bill were on their computers, making flight and hotel reservations and planning their upcoming trip to Europe. Adam and Katie, this on-again, off-again couple, had officially broken up, this time for what seemed like forever, and Katie was the full-time office manager. Adam rarely came around anymore, and Katie had things under control at the office.
Well, Adam and Katie, they'd been together since 2011, so like 4 years off and on. By the summer of 2015, though, Adam said he wanted nothing more to do with Katie. The relationship was just too stormy, and the police had even been called once during one of their arguments. Adam also believed that Katie had been unfaithful, so in his mind, there was not a chance that they would get back together. After Mary left for work at 7:45 a.m. on July 20th, 2015, Bill sat down to eat his breakfast and plan his day. For Bill, according to what he would say later, the day turned out to be an ordinary Monday. He had run errands and napped. Then he did a little bit of work from home. Throughout the day, Bill never saw anyone or even spoke to anyone on the phone. He was alone, he claimed, inside the Yoder house all that day. Then just before 6:30 p.m. that day, Mary called home, and she told Bill that she was still at the office. "I'm coming home," she said, and she didn't sound like herself. She told him she felt really sick and needed to get home. "I don't feel well," she said before she hung up, so Bill decided he wouldn't prepare dinner as he normally did because Mary didn't want to eat anyway. Whatever was bothering her, food was the last thing she wanted. So sometime between 6:45 and 7 p.m., Mary's car pulled up to the house, and after quickly parking it, she entered the house through the kitchen, and she was definitely in a hurry. She rushed in, dashed through the kitchen, toward the bathroom without even saying anything. She looked really pale and distressed, sicker actually than he had ever seen her before in their marriage.
Yeah, so Mary's in the bathroom vomiting as Bill stands outside the door asking her if he could help in any way. She said, "I'm feeling really bad," between bursts of vomiting. So she's in the bathroom for about 30 minutes. When she finally did come out, she looked crappy, pale, exhausted, just bleh, perspiring, trouble walking. And she was carrying a plastic vomit bucket with her. So Mary and the vomit bucket made it to the living room couch, and Mary lay down and closed her eyes.
Well, I guess these trips back and forth from the bathroom and the couch continued for about the next 2 hours as Bill just kind of watched helplessly. Then, according to Bill, around 9:30 p.m., Mary told him to go to bed. She said she felt terrible and she would just rather be alone. She'd sleep on the couch. So Bill reassured her that if she needed anything to just yell for him. He said, "I'll be right upstairs if you need me," and then he went up to bed.
So it hasn't occurred to him maybe she should go to the ER or something? This is a really healthy woman who's never sick, and she's puking her brains out.
Yeah, and you could look at it that way.
Yeah, maybe it's the other way, too, because he is in the medical field. He's less inclined to go to the ER. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if I go to the ER the first day that I have a stomach upset.
Well, this seems to be more than a stomach upset.
It does, and it gets worse. Plus, right. I'd have to say, just yell for me if you need me. I'm going to be upstairs in bed.
Yeah.
Really? You're going upstairs to sleep. You're not available anymore.
See you later, honey.
Yeah, so not super impressed with Bill here.
Now, at 6:30 in the morning, the next day, July 21st, Bill woke up and jumped out of bed. Mary hadn't come upstairs all night. She'd stayed on the couch. I guess mostly to be close to the bathroom. And when Bill got downstairs, he felt a little relieved when he saw Mary sitting up on the couch. But the fact that she was sitting up wasn't a sign of her feeling any better. She actually was feeling even worse than the night before. She hadn't slept all night. Her voice just sounded all broken and weak. She'd been back and forth to the bathroom with vomiting and some diarrhea, severe abdominal pain. So Bill picked up the phone and called his daughter Liana, the one who's a doctor.
A medical doctor.
So he described the past 12 hours to Liana and asked her what he should do. And she told Bill to take Mary to the ER that morning, because it sounded like she needs some IV fluids at the very least.
Sure.
You know, she wasn't keeping anything down. If she's not already dehydrated, she's going to get dehydrated.
So that seems like good advice.
Yes, it does.
It was 9 a.m. by the time Bill had finished getting dressed, but Mary seemed to be getting worse, literally by the minute. So Bill drove really fast to the hospital, and he assured Mary that everything was going to be fine. She'd be back to her old self in no time. But he actually had to help her walk into the ER. They took Mary in right away, and she was given IV fluids, and she seemed to be getting a little bit of her energy back. But she still couldn't even stand on her own. Later in the day, after a CAT scan and other tests, Bill talked with the doctor outside of Mary's room. Doctors were able to control Mary's vomiting and diarrhea with medications, and they also gave her something for pain, so Mary was in and out of wakefulness all that day. A patient Mary had seen on the morning she became ill described her as happy, enthusiastic, vibrant, and full of life. But then, a few hours after lunch, Mary was obviously under the weather. So something between that morning and the early afternoon had set off the illness that Mary had. She'd been smiling, laughing, and being her usual happy self. Then, after visiting her mother at her sister's house during lunch and returning to the office around 1:30 p.m., Mary was a totally different person. So about 3 p.m. on the afternoon of July 21st, Mary asked Bill to run home from the hospital and get her Advair inhaler to bring it back to her. She was having trouble breathing and she thought it might be her allergies. So Bill rushed home, found the Advair, and returned to the hospital. As he came around the corner and looked at Mary's room, he saw several nurses and a doctor at Mary's bedside working on her. Something was definitely wrong. Mary had needed help clearing her lungs, and they were giving her a nebulizer treatment. So it took some time, but doctors were able to stabilize her breathing, and she said she was feeling a little bit better, at least as far as being able to breathe. But Mary had a really gray tinge to her complexion, and her eyes were just tired and heavy. After the doctors and nurses left the room, Bill sat there beside his wife's bed. Based on all the tests they'd run so far, Mary didn't seem to have a virus or a bacterial infection. Whatever she had picked up was very serious, though, and they decided to keep her overnight.
Yeah, and Bill's thinking about what's going on with his wife, and then he remembered that Adam had come down with the same type of illness just a few weeks earlier. At this time, Mary hadn't thrown up in a few hours, and she seemed to be resting well. Bill was concerned, but he assumed that his healthy 60-year-old wife would get better and come home. Throughout that day, on July 21st, Liana stayed in touch with her father by texting. Liana knew Adam was close to their cousin David, who was a nurse at the hospital, and she asked Adam to text David and ask him to recommend a surgeon in case that would become necessary. Now, Liana had heard from someone at the hospital that Mary's scan had showed there might be something wrong with her gallbladder. So that'd be good news. Simple surgery. Everything indicated that Mary would have a full recovery and leave the hospital the next day. And this potential diagnosis gave comfort to Mary's family, because this is something known. It's not strange or unusual or dangerous.
No, kind of a normal thing for an older woman to get is a gallbladder issue. Men as well, but isn't gallbladder where they say fat female and...
Fair female, fat, and 40.
Yeah. So Mary wasn't fat, but she was well over 40, and she was female.
Yeah.
Adam had driven south to spend some time with his sister Liana and her family on Long Island. This had been pre-planned. He'd left on July 15th, 6 days before Mary got sick. He'd planned on staying for a week or more. Mary and Bill were scheduled to make the trip to Liana's that weekend, too, July 24th. Now it looked like that wasn't going to happen. Liana and her husband had been at their lawyer's office on the day Bill called to report Mary had taken ill, so Adam was there watching the kids for them that day. That night, July 21st, Adam, his sister, and brother-in-law were sitting in Liana's living room eating takeout and discussing their mother's health situation back home. At 10 p.m., Adam headed back home to be with his mother and father, and his goal was to drive through the night and be back in town before sunrise. So early on the morning of Wednesday, July 22nd, Bill Yoder woke up to a loud banging coming from his front door. He put on his bathrobe and went down the stairs, and when he opened the door, there were 2 state troopers on the front porch, and they told Bill that the hospital had been trying to reach him during the night. Bill had left his phone ringer on silent overnight, and he had no idea that they'd been trying to reach him. They didn't have a home line. So, this was alarming. Bill thanked the troopers and rushed to the phone to call the hospital. When he reached the switchboard and gave his name and explained who he was, they transferred him up to the ICU, where he was told that his wife had taken a turn for the worse, so now she was being held there. So it turns out that this summer may just be a little more normal than last summer. We've traveled back to Maine to spend time with family, right?
We did.
And some family members have even come here to see us. We even went to the movies last weekend. So this is all just refreshing. And guess what else is refreshing? Playing Best Fiends. If you want your brain to feel like it's summertime all of the time, download Best Fiends. Best Fiends makes my brain feel like it went for a cool dip in the pool, followed with a tall glass of iced tea or maybe beer in your case, Dick.
Possibly. Best Fiends is way more fun than other matching puzzle games out there. It's a game which makes 30 minutes feel like 30 seconds, and it's totally free to download. Just one complaint, it's too much fun. I can't stop playing. Best Fiends has thousands of puzzles to solve. I'm now on level 408, but there's still way more to go.
Well, with Best Fiends, the adorable collectible characters just keep on coming. New challenges, characters, and themes are released all of the time. I'm not at your level yet, but I'm progressing steadily and respectably. One thing is how you strategically team up with each character based on their special abilities to gain extra points and items to level up your friends. There's just so much to love about this game. I encourage you to give it a try and then let us know if you love it as much as we do.
So download the 5-star rated puzzle game, Best Fiends, free today on the App Store or Google Play. That's Friends without the R. Best Fiends.
So, Bill got himself dressed and hurried to the ICU. Mary had seemed to be improving when he had left the hospital the night before. She'd been talking, and he had even gotten a small smile from her. She had been tired, but seemed aware of her surroundings. As they tried to determine what was wrong with her, Mary's blood was sent to the lab for tests, and her doctor had noticed something then. Her white count was elevated to 14.6, and her hemoglobin was 16.2, which was also slightly elevated. So what would that mean?
Well, there's a couple things with that without knowing. The white count, you need also the differential of cells to see which types of white cells are elevated. So that could be, it's not that high a count, but it could indicate infection. And her hemoglobin, you also mentioned, that was a little bit elevated, but she'd been vomiting.
So that was dehydration.
So it could be just a representation of her dehydrated status.
Especially if they took the blood when she first got there.
Right.
Before she'd gotten fluids. Although Bill was considered a happy guy by most people in his life, some believe that Bill was unhappy in his work and his marriage. Mary's sister, for example, Janine, talked about there being cracks in Bill and Mary's marriage. Bill routinely described his marriage as a happy one and even called it a union of soulmates. But Bill wanted to retire, and he and Mary had some financial problems and really no retirement savings to speak of. They also had quite a bit of debt. So according to Janine, Mary had told her that the little bit of retirement savings they'd set aside had now been used for advertising to promote one of Bill's books. Janine said she'd heard from one of the Yoder kids that Bill's recent book just did not pan out. So with these financial problems within the household, Bill was allegedly growing marijuana to sell. But on the other hand, Bill and Mary were in the process of selling their family business, which could give them a big lump sum of money. According to Janine, a more concerning accusation was that Bill was allegedly having an affair with Mary and Janine's sister, Kathleen. In fact, just days before Mary got sick, one of Kathleen's neighbors claimed that she and one of her daughters saw a passionate embrace and kiss between Bill and Kathleen on Kathleen's front porch. Janine also suspected that Mary had called a marriage counselor the week before she got sick. Now, why Mary had called, only Mary would know. But she wouldn't call a marriage counselor if the marriage didn't have any issues. But the problem with all of these accusations and rumors is that there was no supporting evidence. And Bill adamantly denied being involved with his sister-in-law. Also, there was no evidence of the marijuana or the call to the marriage counselor.
Okay, but he hooked up with his sister-in-law not long after his wife's death.
And that's an issue. Was it after or was it before?
Okay.
There are different people believing different things.
I'm sure there are.
But any of these family events where you have different family members with different opinions, it's really hard to get to the heart of what was actually going on
it is.
In that marriage.
This one sister, Janine, maybe she didn't like Bill.
Yeah, and I think that there were a couple of sisters who didn't like Bill. Remember, she had quite a few sisters.
Right. Now, in the ICU, Mary's doctor told Bill that Mary had fallen in the bathroom. Shortly after that, her heart had stopped and she needed to be resuscitated. Bill had thought that he'd be bringing Mary home that day. But now he suddenly is thinking, well, I don't know if she'll ever come home. So Bill called Liana to tell her what was happening. And they spoke briefly. And Bill gave the phone to the ICU doctor so she and Liana could discuss Mary's condition. Liana spoke to the ICU doc for about 15 minutes, getting as much information as she could. And for some unknown reason, Mary appeared to be dying, and there was nobody that knew what to do to save her life.
No, they brought in all kinds of specialists, infectious disease.
Oh, I'd bring in gastroenterologists, I'd bring in hematology, oncology.
Endocrinology.
Sure, neurology. You can get lots of consults.
Yeah, but they just weren't figuring out what it was. So it's very scary, and she's getting worse quickly.
Yeah, there she is in her ICU bed. She's intubated. She's got IVs. She's got monitors hooked up all over her body.
Yeah.
Her arms and legs were so swollen she couldn't move them. And the nurse told Bill that Mary had coded several times during the night. So
that's very alarming.
It sure is. That's not a good sign, by the way. Keep having cardiac arrests.
No, it's kind of like the body's telling you it's done.
Bill called Liana, Tamarin, and Adam and said, you've got to get to the hospital. Your mom is very sick, maybe dying.
Well, earlier that morning, as Adam drove from Long Island to Utica, he had texted Katie, even though they'd broken up. He said, I'm sorry to put pressure on you. You don't owe me anything, but I need you. So around 2 o'clock that afternoon, Adam and Tamarin were at the hospital. Liana was on her way. The monitors went off and the staff called a code blue, and they had to work to bring Mary back again. This time, after saving Mary's life, the doctor looked pretty hopeless. It's not something you ever want to see in your doctor or a family member's doctor. He told Bill that she had come back, but her eyes were fixed and dilated. She may be brain dead, he said, and even kind of expressed his condolences. But then the doctor went and saw Mary again and returned a few moments later and told them that she was actually responsive again. He was pretty shocked by this. Bill and the kids were relieved, but I think the doctor knew better. This wouldn't last. Liana arrived at her mother's bedside at 2:20 p.m. Bill explained to the best of his ability what was going on. All of Mary's children and Bill were now standing by her side, just crying and really not knowing what to do. Mary was the one they'd all looked to for guidance. She was really the backbone of the family. She could find the good in almost any situation, and she believed in her family and loved them unconditionally. So it was really hard for them to imagine life without Mary.
And then after the last code blue, Mary's family was impressed by her strength and will to live. Because it wasn't as though her eyes had opened and she was just blankly staring into space. She was looking around and gesturing with her eyes. But then at 2:23 p.m., she had another cardiac arrest. This is her 8th one. The team went to work while Bill and the kids waited beyond the curtain. After about a half hour, the doctor came out and told Mary's family that this time they couldn't revive her. She was pronounced dead at 2:53 p.m. So this is pretty shocking.
Very shocking.
2 days before, she'd been working gardening and going on about her busy life. And now she's dead. This is a tough one for anybody to understand what had happened.
Certainly, even the doctors. But of course, they really wanted to know what had happened and why she had died. They wanted to know what had made her so sick, so fast. She'd gone from a stomach flu or a possible gallbladder problem to 8 cardiac arrests and death. The doctor asked for Bill's permission to do an autopsy, and Bill told Mary's doctors of course he wanted to know what happened. Her whole family wanted to know. So after agreeing to have Mary's body brought to the medical examiner's office, Bill walked out of the hospital alone and just really unsure of how to move forward. According to his daughters, he just didn't seem to know what to do with himself. He was completely devastated.
He was pretty lost.
About a month earlier, in June, Katie had texted Adam about money he owed to her. She had loaned him about $20,000 to buy a car and pay off credit card debts, and she was demanding payment. But Adam thought this was just a way for her to stay in his life. How does a young woman like that have $20,000 to loan anyway?
Well, she got it from her parents.
Well, sure. But that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. And I guess he wasn't repaying it.
No, but according to their agreement, he wasn't supposed to start repaying it until he graduated from college. So finally, after they bickered back and forth over text, Adam agreed to meet Katie for tea and discuss the repayment. But the meeting didn't go well. Adam told Katie he wanted nothing else to do with her, and she demanded the full $20,000. Now at this point, Adam had still been recovering from what doctors had called a stomach bug that had started that past April. And as he thought back on it, he became sick only after taking some alpha brain supplement that Katie had given him. But of course, it was really impossible to believe that Katie would have put something in the pills to make him sick. He didn't think she was that bad. So Adam had first felt sick about 3 months before his mother Mary died. Weeks later, he still felt horrible, and Katie was prodding him to discuss how sick he had been and what illness the doctors actually thought he had. According to Adam, she wouldn't stop asking him about it. She wanted the details. Adam couldn't figure out why she was so fixated on the cause of his illness. And actually, half joking, he texted her, "If you poisoned me, I'm afraid we can no longer be friends." But Katie didn't respond to the text, which may have been kind of telling. Adam then thought about the date that he became ill, and he texted, "And I'd taken my second dose of the brain supplement the day before I got sick." Again, no response from Katie.
Kind of sounds like he's accusing her.
Well, I think that he really thought she may have put something in the pills, even though he was trying to dismiss it.
Right.
But usually when you're half joking like that, there is some truth.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, certainly.
July 25th, 2015 was Liana's daughter's second birthday. Also happened to be the day the family chose to honor Mary with a celebration of life. Her body had not yet been released by the medical examiner, but Mary had requested cremation, so the celebration was planned for Mary's friends and family to pay their respects. The kids ended up doing most of the planning for Bill, who was having a lot of trouble coping with his wife's death. Also, Katie was there, and she said she'd help out with whatever things needed to be done.
Well, they didn't have a wake or traditional funeral. Their focus was on the wonderful person that Mary had been. Because her garden was in bloom, the family decided to have this event at the house. Bill told Liana and other family members before the celebration that he was going to be staying upstairs. He just couldn't cope. But Katie was actually there all day helping out. She stayed by Adam's side, and she had been since Mary's death, and she'd even gone out and picked up hundreds of dollars worth of food and drinks to contribute to this celebration of Mary's life. So Katie seemed pretty much like a family member.
Right. She's doing a lot of the work.
Well, people thought that Katie and Mary were quite close, and Katie saw Mary as a bit of a mentor.
Then the toxicology results from Mary's autopsy came back in August. She had ingested a toxin, which caused cell death, which caused her death. So the police were brought into the investigation. They checked all of Mary's supplements and plants in her garden for something that Mary could have inadvertently been exposed to. The toxin was identified as a medicine called Colchicine. This is an anti-inflammatory, normally prescribed to treat gout. The last sample of Mary's blood was sent to the lab, and the medical examiner ordered a Colchicine comparison test. So results from the initial testing confirmed that Mary had died from colchicine poisoning. So that means the next step is going to be to determine how the poison had gotten into her body.
Well, it's a very unusual thing.
Well, it is. This is a medicine that's not used that much anymore. And other than gout and another inflammatory disease called Behçet's syndrome, and I think maybe sometimes pericarditis is helped by it, there's not a lot of use for colchicine. And the other big problem is that there's a very narrow therapeutic index in the sense that a very thin line between therapeutic effects and side effects and overdosage effects. So it's not something medicine-wise that you can be real aggressive with.
So it's not something that you would just normally come across?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
I mean, even for gout, there's far superior medications than colchicine.
Yeah, it's kind of something they don't use a lot anymore, like you said.
No.
So throughout September of 2015, Adam continued to be in a relationship with Katie. At this point, he was living at a cousin's, and he was seeing Katie very regularly. When he found out that colchicine was the source of his mother's death, Adam decided that he would help and find the source. So one day after school, Adam picked Katie up on campus and explained that he needed to do something at the office. After parking, he told her he was going to run in and gather up anything that had the potential to have been ingested by his mother. Something was found in my mother's system, he told Katie. And Adam would insist later that he never told Katie what the specific toxin had been that was found in Mary's system.
Adam's key to the office was at his home, but fortunately Katie had hers. So as they entered the building, Adam said he's going to put any potential source of the poison in a box and take it to the medical examiner's office. So Adam collected Mary's Shakely products and anything else he saw as a possible source of the toxin. He pointed to different items he wanted collected and brought to the ME. But as he's watching Katie, he's thinking she wasn't helping to find things. She seemed mostly to be watching at what he was doing and observing him. So as he continued to search the office, Katie hovered nearby him. And their conversation grew more contentious. Katie's ruling things out, and Adam wanted to test everything. So they left the office. Adam drove Katie back to college. When he was in the office with her, Adam had kept the key, so he drove back to the office by himself. And he got some more things to take to the ME's office. And one of these items was an open carton of almond milk, which Mary used in mixing her Shakely powder. So he brought that, everything else he had collected, down to the medical examiner's office.
So there's a big problem with this, right? The chain of custody has been ruined.
There's a big problem in that he's bringing this stuff down and saying, I got it from my mother's office. How do they know that?
How do they know it hasn't been messed with by him?
That's right.
So they weren't really thrilled that he did this, although it does seem like he was trying to be helpful. The ME's office kept Liana updated on what they'd found, and she would relay the information she got to the rest of the family. They'd sent out samples of Mary's gastric tract to test for colchicine, and the result was positive. Since it was present there, it meant she'd probably ingested the poison orally. The ME's office subpoenaed the hospital for a sample of Mary's blood from when she was admitted, too, and those results were also positive. So this result proved that when she walked into the ER with Bill, she was really already dying. There's no antidote for an overdose of colchicine. Once a certain amount of the poison enters your system, you might be walking and talking, but you're basically dying.
Yeah.
Pretty horrific.
Nothing you can do to reverse the course.
No, and that's terrifying.
So once it had been determined that the colchicine was not accidentally ingested by Mary, the case became investigated as a homicide. So, of course, Bill's the first suspect. He's the husband, and he had the ability to purchase the drug. And after Mary died, Bill had begun spending time with her sister Kathleen, and this relationship did become romantic, and some of Mary's other sisters suspected that the two had been involved before Mary's death. So this certainly makes him, Bill, look suspicious.
Oh, absolutely.
Although I would also want to know, chiropractic office doesn't need colchicine.
Well, they're not going to say you don't need it. As long as you have the ability to prescribe, you're allowed to order these things.
Right.
So, no, it might not be something they needed, but he would be able to get it by ordering through the office. It's not something you could walk into CVS and buy.
No, you can't.
So in late November, the medical examiner called homicide detectives. He'd received an anonymous letter saying who exactly was Mary's killer. So this was a huge break in the case. They went to pick it up, and it was a one-page typed letter that the ME had put in an evidence bag. So after reading the anonymous letter, the person that detectives really wanted to speak to was no longer Bill, but Bill and Mary's son, Adam. The anonymous letter pointed directly to Adam as the killer. After the letter arrived, detectives made a few calls. They decided to have Adam come in for questioning. Before that, the detectives requested a subpoena from the judge for E-ZPass records of Mary, Bill, and Adam from near the time of Mary's death. E-ZPass, if you don't know, it's a white plastic gadget about the size of a deck of cards, a little smaller, that you stick to your vehicle's windshield, and that allows you to drive through the toll lanes and over bridges without having to stop and pay tolls. But it's also a lot like a tracking device. Once looking at those records, they could subpoena CCTV video from the toll booths that his witnesses had used. And the videos and the records would probably give them some insight into the comings and goings of the persons of interest, as well as their vehicles. And it would also give them dates and times. So at this point, they're specifically interested in Adam Yoder's 1991 Jeep Wrangler, which the letter writer had described in some detail. They wrote down Katie's name as someone they needed to speak to also. As a person of interest herself, she'd been with Mary working on the day Mary became ill. Plus, she had dated Adam off and on for years. But their main reason for talking to Katie at this point was to gather more information about Adam Yoder.
So when detectives contacted Adam for an interview, he wasn't unfriendly, he wasn't alarmed, and he agreed to come right in. And based on the anonymous letter, detectives applied for a search warrant on Adam's car. They were going to talk to him, and they needed to search his car. So Adam showed up to speak with them within an hour, and he came across as basically an honest kid. His sister and E-ZPass records showed that he had been at his sister's house in Long Island when his mother became ill. And once he was told about the letter, he wanted to see it, and he was allowed to see a portion of it. They showed Adam a section of the anonymous letter detailing how they would find colchicine inside his Jeep. They also showed Adam where specifically his name was in the letter. According to the detectives, his face turned white when they showed him this. Someone was trying to frame him for his mother's murder.
Well, he really did seem stunned.
I'll bet he was.
And he did agree to allow the detectives to search his car. One of the forensic investigators pulled out a bottle of colchicine from under the front passenger seat, and it was wrapped in cardboard packaging, and also a receipt from where the toxin had been purchased online was sitting there with it. When they pulled out the bottle of colchicine, Adam was very surprised. He said, "I've never seen that before. It was certainly put there by someone else." And if you think about it, why would he keep it in his car with the receipt and then go to the police station with it there?
That's pretty clumsy, isn't it?
Yes.
Back on December 22nd, 2014, inside a supermarket, Katie Conley bought a $150 prepaid MasterCard. The last 4 digits on that MasterCard were 3288. Now, she paid cash for it. Then on 9 days later, Wednesday, December 31st, at 11:26 a.m., someone signed into the Mr. Adam Yoder 1990 Gmail email account created at Chiropractic Family Care on the computer Katie used, and that person ordered colchicine.
Then on January 28th of 2015, and this is like 6 months before Mary died, customer service rep Rosa Vargas sent a tracking number and link to trace the shipment of the colchicine to Adam Yoder's email. The toxin was on its way to the Chiropractic Family Care office. About a week later, the bottle of colchicine supposedly ordered by Adam Yoder was delivered to the chiropractic office. Like most packages delivered to the office, Katie Connolly was the one who signed for it. In the Notes app on her iPhone 11 days later, a note was created at 4:27 p.m. It was titled Here for This. And on the list it said Grow Light, ? Light for Chickens, ? DAAD Scholarship, Arnica Gel, Milk Cartons, Breather. So it also said 0.5 per kilo, lethal dose estimated, 0.9 kilograms, 180 pounds, 81.6 kilograms, security, ugly red computer, personal phrase, cheese. So what did all this mean? Well, if you take the 180-pound notation alone and pair it to the fact it was translated down to 81.6 kilograms, with 0.9 kilograms before it, it seemed as if the author of the note was trying to calculate the exact amount of colchicine needed to kill a 180-pound person. All of the other writing was maybe subterfuge, words and phrases shielding the true purpose of the note? We're not sure.
Don't know, but it certainly does look like you're trying to figure out a lethal dose.
Well, yeah, it has the LD estimate with the kilograms.
Yeah. When Adam got over his sudden stomach illness in April 2015, he did think about the possibility of Katie putting something in the alpha brain supplement pills she'd given him. He began to consider it was strange how it was that she kept pushing him to take the supplement, and how adamant she was about how it had once helped her with her studies. Then he decided that Katie would never go that far.
Then in May, right before Mother's Day weekend, Mary had grown increasingly worried about her son. She was texting Adam regularly and asking him what was going on. Now, Mary had always been there for Adam. She was his mom. She'd helped him out of personal and financial problems and gave him helpful advice. Adam had told his mother he was dealing with the stress in his life in a very unhealthy way. But he'd get through it, he assured her. He was struggling with some personal issues that he didn't want to share with his parents, and this had caused a distance between Adam and his parents, especially Mary, who had always encouraged Adam to be open and honest about his problems. So they argued and they had a disagreement on Mother's Day. But then Adam had gone to the house and they had a nice dinner together. Mary had spoken to Adam about his issues and she'd left it at that. And by June, Adam was determined not to fall back into an intimate relationship with Katie. He decided it was not healthy. He told her they could remain friends, but any chance of a romance was over. So this was about a month before Mary's death. Katie may have realized then that she only had one way to remain in contact with Adam, and maybe that was the money he owed her. According to Katie, Adam had not made any effort to pay her back, and she started contacting him and asking what he was going to do about it.
So, Adam texted Katie in late June, and he agreed to meet her at a local pizza place so they could talk. Now, he claimed the agreement he had with Katie was for him to begin paying her after he got out of school and started working. The deal included Adam taking a percentage from each of his paychecks and depositing it into an account that Katie had set up. So that's reasonable.
Yeah, but it seemed like Katie was still kind of stuck on the idea of getting back together with Adam, and she wouldn't let it go. Adam said that was never going to happen, but they were going to be friends. But looking back, Adam thought that from the time he started seeing Katie, she'd shown some signs of malignant narcissism and personality disorder. And of course, that would be looking back.
Hindsight's always 100%, right?
Exactly. So after they were introduced at Katie's high school graduation party, Adam had sent Katie a Facebook message. He was interested in her, he wrote, and wanted to see her. But he didn't get an immediate response. It was actually weeks after getting the Facebook message when Katie replied. But by then, Adam had met another girl. He was 20 years old then, and this girl he was seeing was only 16, and he had sex with her. Adam would later express regret about that, admitting it was a terrible decision. Katie found out about the girl, and she acted like he'd cheated on her, even though they hadn't even dated yet.
That's strange.
Yes. So over the next couple of years, Katie would use this mistake against him and bring it up often during their entire relationship. Now, I would say maybe you shouldn't see a guy who had sex with a 16-year-old.
Well, possibly. But, she was 18 at the time. This is when she had just graduated.
I know, but 16 is just so different from 18. There's big changes there.
And legally, it's different.
That too, yeah.
So after the police found the bottle of Colchicine in Adam's Jeep, along with a receipt from where it had been purchased, investigators felt pretty certain that somebody was trying to frame Adam for the murder of his mother. So that's when they returned their focus to Bill, husband and father. And as they looked into Bill's life, the first interesting lead was Bill's involvement with Kathleen Richmond, Mary's sister. So obviously the timing of this relationship was important. If it was evidence that it started before Mary's death, well, then you got a motive. And if Bill had the nerve to kill his wife, it was possible that he would try to frame his son for the crime. Police were also very interested in the fact that Adam had become very sick back in April. Adam insisted his illness began with taking an alpha brain supplement that Katie Conley had given him and encouraged him to take. Adam turned over the alpha brain supplements to the police. Then detectives interviewed Mary's sisters, two of whom gave statements saying they had no idea who could have murdered their sister. Just didn't make any sense. Mary had no enemies. In fact, she seemed to be pretty universally loved.
So in December, 5 months after Mary's death, detectives called Katie. They were preparing to interview Bill Yoder again, and they needed her help. Katie knew the inner workings of the office, and she was there on the day Mary got sick. She knew Mary and Bill pretty well. Had Bill been at the office at any time on the day Mary became sick? Had Bill or Adam received that package that Katie had signed for from Art Chemicals? Or had either of them stopped by the office to pick it up from her? Also, were Bill and Mary a couple that argued very often? So those were just some of the questions they wanted Katie to help them with. The police knew that the colchicine had been shipped to the office. They also knew from where it had been ordered. Bill could have placed the order and made it look like Adam had done it from Katie's workstation computer, and he could have stopped by the office to pick up the package as well. But he claimed he didn't. Katie explained to the detectives the procedure for ordering products at the office. They had already asked Adam about the email account used to order the toxin, and Adam had told them that the email address was very similar to two of his own personal email accounts combined, so someone had made it up. He said he'd never set it up, and he had no idea it had existed until detectives had brought it to his attention.
Yeah, and investigators spoke to Katie for hours on both December 18th and December 19th. She seemed honest, and she seemed eager to answer their questions. Really, she had a girl-next-door innocence to her. Those first interviews with Katie and others close to Mary were about getting as much information as possible. Katie seemed to the police as being cooperative and helpful, and when she left, she told them to call her any time, and she would help however she could. Shortly after Katie's interview and Bill's subsequent interview, detectives learned that forensics had found female DNA under one of the stamps on the anonymous letter. So detectives thought back to the initial interviews with Katie. She had explained to them that she placed a stamp on each envelope going out of the office. They didn't have pre-made envelopes like most businesses, so she pre-stamped them herself, licking the stamps.
Yeah, but one of the detectives thought she was kind of making too big a point about that, like she may have had some concerns in that direction. Investigators decided they'd bring her back and put some pressure on her in her next interview. They had computer forensics working full-time looking for any links to any of their persons of interest. So they called Katie before the interview and got her to agree to provide a DNA sample. When she arrived, she'd brought the envelopes and letterhead they used at the office with her. So now Katie was offering information and evidence without being asked, which to police is just a telltale sign that a person has something to hide. Most people do not do that. To me, it could go either way. Maybe she was just trying to be helpful.
Well, we've already talked about how that she came across that way.
Yes, but now they're not so sure about Katie.
Yeah.
They're having some doubts. She talked about the day Adam had picked her up at school and they went to the office to collect any potential contaminated items of interest so Adam could bring them to the ME's office. And Katie said the conversation became contentious between them as Adam grew angry and demanding while inside of the office. She said it made her uncomfortable, and then she claimed to be frightened of Adam because he had a temper. Then as detectives pushed her for more answers, Katie broke down and cried. Finally, Katie admitted that she had sent the anonymous letter.
As she told him how Adam had admitted on the day that they were at the office back in September that he put the colchicine he used to kill his mother underneath the passenger seat of his Jeep. She claimed that she saw Adam on the day the package of colchicine arrived, and according to Katie, Adam showed up at the office looking for the delivery. Katie claimed to have withheld the information about the delivery because she was afraid Adam would turn the blame to her. This was also a suspicious thing to the detectives, and they began to consider that maybe Katie's more involved than they thought. Katie said she had never touched the bottle of colchicine, but the bottle of colchicine found in Adam's Jeep had traces of female DNA. And this DNA turned out to be Katie's DNA.
So she has to be lying there, right?
That's a lie.
Yeah, it has to be, really. So they studied Katie's iPhone, and investigators learned that Katie had been lying about certain things during these first few interviews. So for one, on December 21st, there were several inconsistencies in her story. Katie had no reason to be evasive or to avoid the truth, of course, unless she had something to hide. So 2 computer forensic specialists from Utica College figured out the Mr. Adam Yoder 1990 Gmail account's password, which was Adam is gay. Now, when detectives saw this, they felt like this wasn't a password that Adam would have used.
Probably not.
But it did seem like something a woman working to frame her ex-boyfriend might come up with. Sounded like it could be a woman scorned that would come up with a password like that. Another interesting fact was that the Gmail account had been created in September of 2014, so that's 10 months before Mary was poisoned. They didn't think that Adam would have planned his mother's homicide that far in advance. Generally, if a son was going to kill his mother, based on the type of relationship they knew that Mary and Adam had, it would have been a crime of passion and opportunity. It likely would not have been planned so far in advance. But it was still possible. But now they're turning away from Adam and looking more at Katie.
They certainly are.
Katie told detectives that Adam had been acting strangely since his mother's death. Well, who wouldn't?
Right.
You know? Then she began to point the finger at him. She went over the details in the letter, saying that Adam had actually confessed to her. So the way she's just kind of scraping out information little by little is really raising suspicions. That's not normal. She said that Adam had put the toxin into one of Mary's vitamin capsules, and she said she didn't report him sooner because she was afraid of him. This is really all hard to believe when you would look at her texts and her interactions with Adam, because she still seemed like she wanted to be in a relationship with him. So the police really weren't buying Katie's story anymore. They believed that whoever had written this anonymous letter could be the killer, and she was admitting that she wrote the anonymous letter. They thought she was likely trying to get Adam into trouble. Katie had opportunity because she was at the office on the day Mary got sick, and also her computer had accessed the Gmail account, but none of Adam's devices had ever accessed that account, ever.
That's very interesting. So Katie's next interrogation was not particularly friendly. Detectives accused her of committing the murder and trying to frame her ex-boyfriend. Well, that's certainly not friendly, is it?
No.
Katie talked herself into a corner because she claimed to have evidence. In the detective's eyes, Katie was showing clear signs of antisocial personality disorder and narcissism.
Yeah, he could think that, but he really isn't in a place where he should be making diagnoses.
Of course not. Katie displayed a pattern of persistent lying, arrogance, impulsiveness, and a lack of empathy and remorse. Now, Katie continued trying to convince the detective that Bill or Adam had murdered Mary, but she never asked for an attorney, even after she was read her Miranda rights. And after talking about the IP addresses showing Mr. Adam Yoder 1990 had been logged into from Katie's parents' house in chiropractic family care, Katie insisted Adam must have done it remotely. because he knew how to hack into computers, she claimed. But detectives knew that if it had been done remotely, computer forensics would have seen evidence of that, but they hadn't.
Well, and also, I don't think Adam was really capable of hacking. He'd taken some computer courses at a community college and not even done that well, so he wasn't some kind of hacking expert. Katie was unwilling to admit, though, that she knew anything about that Mr. Adam Yoder 1990 Gmail account, or that she had ever logged into it. The IP addresses were connected to her iPhone, and the times and dates connected to IPs at the office and her home. Also, Adam had not been in the area at all. If he had logged in, computer forensics would have found out where and when. They'd gone through all of Adam's electronics, including his iPhone and laptop, and he hadn't been lying to them about anything as far as they could tell. In late December, Katie agreed to take a voice stress test. Voice stress analysis can detect subtle changes or micro tremors in a person's voice, and some believe it's easier and even more accurate than a polygraph, but Katie's test showed deception. After that, they presented her with new warrants and they confiscated her phone. We're going to be heading over to your residence to take your computers and anything else we deem important to the investigation, they told Katie. And Katie's parents were just stunned when they learned about this. Of course, they were sure their daughter was innocent. Katie's sisters also believed she was innocent. But more surprising and more interesting to me, some of Mary's sisters couldn't believe that Katie had poisoned Mary. Mary had been like a mentor to Katie, and these sisters loved Katie. Mary's sisters called detectives and told them that they thought Bill may have been framing Katie. But then Bill also believed that Katie was innocent. So it's just this weird conglomeration of people and their opinions that really isn't panning out. Because if Bill was guilty, would he be saying Katie was innocent? Or would he be trying to point the finger at her? And it's just really unusual for the sisters to be blaming Bill. But we don't know the history. Maybe they didn't like Bill.
Well, I think it's obvious that some didn't like him.
Yes. And then there's his thing with the one sister, who the other sisters were not happy about this.
Yeah, I think that's a major sticking point for me.
Yeah, they actually thought that Bill was taking advantage of Mary's sister Kathleen, who seemed to have some issues and had lost her husband within a year or two of this. But according to Bill, they were just comforting each other because they'd both lost someone really important in their lives, and that could be legitimate as well.
So a grand jury was convened and an indictment for second-degree murder was set down. Katie was charged with second-degree murder in Mary's death and held in jail. She's 22 years old. For months, the digital trail was pointing directly at Katie, but there just wasn't a clear motive. And you know, we always like to have motive.
Well, I can kind of see why she would do it to Adam, but why she would do it to Mary, it's a little strange. Although it did kind of work for her, so it's possible. Plus, people who are in the throes of love and are not being rational don't behave rationally. This was definitely a circumstantial case, but the prosecution was very confident that the evidence was overwhelming against Katie. Some patients from the day Mary became sick testified that Katie was the only other person in the office that day, and of course Katie had access to Mary's supplements and drinks. The defense tried to point to Bill and Adam as Mary's real killers. Mary's daughters testified to the extreme grief Bill Yoder had suffered after his wife's death.
Now, there was forensic evidence that Katie had ordered the toxin and took delivery of it.
And that's very strong evidence right there.
And then a sales rep testified that she had spoken to a young woman about the order over the phone. But the most damning evidence was that the credit card Katie had purchased was used to buy the Colchicine, and the email used in the order had been only used on Katie's devices. Now, the prosecution said that Katie's motive was to get Adam back with her, and it did work, at least for a while.
It did. After Mary died, Adam and Katie got back together for a few months. And then after the relationship ended again, maybe she decided that she'd frame Adam then, and that's when she sent the anonymous letter. But once the case went to trial, Mary's daughters believed that Katie was responsible, although it took them a while to get there. But Mary's sister Sharon was really upset when she learned that Bill had become romantically involved with her and Mary's sister Kathleen. In court, Katie's defense attorney brought up Bill's relationship with Kathleen as his motive to kill Mary. According to the defense, Bill was not a grieving widower. Now, he was claiming that the romantic relationship began a few months after Mary's death, but that neighbor who claimed to have seen Bill and Kathleen in a passionate kiss and embrace testified that she'd seen that well before Mary's death. Another thing brought up by the defense to point the finger at Bill was that he had recently inherited over $400,000 from his father. Now, Mary had been the primary breadwinner for a long time, so this was giving Bill new financial independence. And maybe he didn't want to share this money with Mary. Maybe he felt like he no longer needed Mary. It's a harsh way to look at it, but we don't know Bill. Maybe he did. But the thing is, even if Bill did have that motive, there really was no evidence that he had been at the office or that he had anything to do with the poisoning. The defense suggested that Bill may have given Mary a second dose of the poison when he was at her side at the hospital. Also, Bill did have access to her computer at the office, but he didn't have access to her phone, and he was definitely not the one who did the searches for colchicine on Katie's phone. So he could have gotten on the computer Katie used at the office, but there's no way he got on her phone, and there's no way he did anything from her parents' house, which the IP address had shown.
Right. So as they waited for a verdict from the jury, Mary's husband and kids all believed that Katie was guilty. They believed that Katie had an evil side to her personality. But then 3 of Mary's sisters believed Katie. They didn't think she was capable of murder, especially murdering Mary, who they believed Katie loved like a mother. They believed that Bill was the only one with a motive.
Yeah, but they seem to be the only ones that really thought Bill did it.
Well, the jury didn't.
No. So they deliberated for 3 days, but it was a hung jury. 8 wanted to acquit Katie. So it was kind of leaning her way.
That's a big one. 4 of the jurors voted for finding her guilty, and the other 8 wanted to acquit her. That's amazing.
Well, yes, so some of this jury must have believed that Bill was the killer, or that it wasn't Katie at least.
Right.
But the thing is that Bill could never be charged now, no matter what. Because for his testimony in front of the grand jury, Bill had been given lifelong immunity. So that really bothered the sisters who thought he did it, as you can imagine.
Why would they see the need to offer him lifetime immunity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know why they'd have to offer him immunity, because you think he'd be very willing to testify.
Yeah.
But maybe he had a smart lawyer who got that figured out for him.
It would work.
But also, the police didn't think he did it, so maybe they didn't think it mattered.
Yeah, although I'd ask then, if they didn't think he did it or that it didn't matter, why do they feel the need to offer him immunity?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is it must have been something his lawyer came up with and they agreed to.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, it is strange, because I would have thought that Bill would have been happy to speak to them and testify about it. Although it never hurts, because people do get found guilty who are innocent, so having that protection is always nice.
It certainly could be in his case.
Yeah, absolutely.
In trial number 2, the prosecution's case was unchanged. But Katie now had a new defense attorney who said that Katie had been framed by Adam, not Bill. This defense attorney suggested that Adam could have accessed any of Katie's devices at any time.
So we have these 2 different defense attorneys who take 2 different tacks.
Yeah.
And I think I like the one with Adam better, because there's certainly more evidence that Adam could have been involved than Bill.
That's true.
I mean, he would have been more easily inside of Katie's house. It would have been easier for him to get into Katie's phone. But then, if that were the case, why would the anonymous letter come up?
Mm-hmm.
Unless Katie had written the letter honestly thinking that Adam did it, which I guess is what the defense was trying to say. But I see a lot of holes in that. That doesn't really hold up to scrutiny.
It doesn't. Then there was another new witness, and this is David King, who was Adam's cousin and his former roommate. He had begun to doubt Adam and felt that Katie might be innocent. He testified that Adam had expertise in computer science and could easily have hacked her devices. He had also seen Adam with Katie's laptop and knew that he had access to Katie's work computer.
Well, that might be true, but they already said the forensic experts would be able to see if there had been hacking, and they hadn't seen any hacking.
Right.
So that's kind of a moot point there. But Katie's new defense attorney also claimed that Adam had been abusive to Katie. And this was a big thing, because this would show that she would have had reason to be afraid of Adam. And looking back, 1 year before Mary died, Katie had filed a rape complaint against Adam, and she'd later dropped the complaint. So either that was true, or Katie was not above calling rape just to get what she wanted. So Adam did testify that he never ordered the colchicine and he never planted evidence on Katie's computer or phone. And the forensic computer expert testified that none of Katie's devices had been hacked. Now, one thing he did admit to was slapping Katie a few times during a fight, but he denied any other abuse or any sexual assault. He did admit that he'd been drinking heavily on the night Katie said that he had raped her, so he had no memory of that night. But the next morning he said things had seemed fine between them and he didn't get the impression that he'd done anything wrong. They'd actually spent the next day together and had consensual sex. And it was days later when Katie texted him accusing him of rape after they'd had an argument. So I'm always one to believe the woman, but with Katie, you've got to have a little bit of suspicion now that with all we know about her, she's really not presenting herself as an honest person.
Well, and even after she did accuse him of rape, she withdrew that charge.
Right.
Now, Adam then brought up his illness he suffered a couple of months before his mother's death. He told the jury about the brain supplements Katie had given him, and this was before he became ill. But the forensic examination of the bottle of supplements found no evidence of colchicine. So the prosecution suggested that Katie may have poisoned Adam first to see what might happen, but they have absolutely no physical proof of that.
So that's interesting, because if she gave him a bottle of supplements with colchicine in a couple of the capsules, how would she know which capsules he was going to take? Because obviously she hadn't poisoned all of them. So that's a little curious there. I see a little hole in the plot.
Well, in the sense of her poisoning him, sure.
But her poisoning him, to me, seems like part of her whole plot to kill Mary.
Well, you'll never know. Maybe he just had a stomach bug.
Maybe. Or maybe she put it in something else and he was just focused on those.
Yeah, because she's talking about make sure you take your supplement.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's no physical proof that she poisoned him, but there are some interesting things to look at.
And then there was one more thing that pointed away from Adam being guilty. In Katie's online searches, they found evidence of more incriminating behavior. Before deciding on colchicine, Katie apparently had searched for thallium, arsenic, and cyanide.
Now that is very suspicious.
Well, I guess that is, if it's actually Katie who's doing the computer search, right?
Right. True.
I mean, you're still back at the same thing, that other people had access to her computer.
Okay, but you have the DNA. There was the rep from the drug company who spoke to a young woman. So it certainly wasn't Adam or Bill on the phone with her.
Nope.
And the letter, really, that letter, she really just screwed herself sending that letter in, because that made her look much worse and really turned the focus to her.
That might not have been the best idea.
No, but it's something a young, not too bright person might do. It seems like something a kid might do when they lie to you, right?
Yeah.
They might have an anonymous letter or something silly like that to try and make you look at someone else, but it's just so obviously just a way to escape looking guilty. Really not a very smart move.
No.
Before the case went to the jury, the court actually allowed them to consider the lesser charge of manslaughter. In order to convict on that charge, the prosecution only had to convince the jury that Katie had intended to hurt Mary. not kill her when she poisoned her. So the jury sent a note to the judge after a little while saying that they were unable to reach a verdict, but the judge encouraged them to go back in and try again. Then just 2 hours after that, the jury came back and they found Katie not guilty of second-degree murder. But then they did find her guilty of manslaughter. As Katie was taken from the courtroom to await sentencing, she turned towards her family and she smiled and she said nothing. The Yoder family held one another as they left the courtroom and they didn't speak to anyone. Katie was sentenced in January 2018. In tears, Adam Yoder stood up from his seat in the gallery and walked up to the lectern, and he had prepared a victim's impact statement, which he read. And in part, he said, "I introduced Katie Conley to my family, and because I loved her, they all accepted her and treated her as family. I got her a job with my parents, and if I hadn't done those things, my mother would still be alive." Katie sat in an orange jumpsuit staring blankly at the front of the room, as Adam added, "Make no mistake, I hate the defendant with every bone in my body and every drop of blood in my veins. I hate Caitlin Ann Conley because Caitlin Ann Conley murdered my mother."
So then after Adam returned to his seat, Katie stood and approached the lectern. "I am innocent," she said. Then she thanked those who supported her. She never apologized for Mary's death or acknowledged the pain she had caused.
Well, you can't do that if you're claiming you're innocent.
That's right. Now, one of Mary's sisters stood at the lectern and explained that she and her other 2 sisters supported Katie and believe she is innocent, before asking the judge for leniency. Katie ended up being sentenced to 23 years in prison.
So that's near the top of the numbers for manslaughter. So the judge wasn't super lenient with her.
No, he wasn't.
Well, even now, some people in Utica, including some of Mary's own family members, support Katie and believe she's innocent. But if you think about it, the idea that Bill or Adam committed the crime and framed Katie just doesn't make sense and seems highly unlikely.
Well, yes. I just still have a tough time of why she would try to kill Mary.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem, is the motive is just so uncertain.
She wants to get back at her ex-boyfriend, and the best way to do that is to kill his mother?
Well, maybe not just wanting to get back at him, but wanting to get him back. She seemed to know that he would reach out to her for comfort once his mother died.
Well, but even when that happened, it didn't last.
Well, and maybe she didn't mean to kill Mary. Maybe she poisoned Adam and he got really sick but got better. And she thought, well, I'll do that to Mary, and she'll get really sick, but she'll get better. But during that, Adam will turn to me.
Yeah.
And it'll make us closer.
Except for that computer or iPhone notation about figuring a lethal dosage of colchicine.
True. That's true.
That would indicate that maybe they weren't trying to just make the person sick.
Or maybe she was trying to avoid giving a lethal dose and trying to keep it under that. And maybe Mary, being so much smaller and older, her body just couldn't take it.
Possibly.
But I don't think we'll ever know exactly what happened. Although the more I think about this case, the more I think that Katie is responsible for putting that toxin in Mary's body somehow. I'm not sure of her motive, honestly, but, I mean, as you know, you don't have to have a motive proven.
So the things that Adam got from his mother's office and turned over to the police, did they analyze for colchicine in any of those things?
Well, I'm not sure if they did, because would it even matter?
Right.
Once the chain of custody is broken and Adams touched all that stuff, and he was a suspect for a while, is it anything that they found out going to be valid or even matter? I don't know.
That's true, but I would think it'd be nice to test anyway.
And they may have. I'm not sure. I know they tested a lot of things, but I don't have a list of exactly what was tested. I just know there was DNA on the bottle, and I know about the computer forensics. But I don't even know the level that was in Mary's body, how much of that was in her body, although obviously it was a lethal dose.
Right.
But like some had suggested that thought Bill had done it, she could have been given a second dose in the hospital. Maybe she was recovering and then she was given more.
Yeah, it's a twisty case.
It is. In my opinion, Bill doesn't seem like he was trying to kill his wife. He seemed very broken after this. And no offense, but Mary's sister Kathleen didn't seem to be that exciting. She seemed kind of like a more plain, dependent woman. She didn't seem as exciting as Mary.
Well,
not that that means anything.
That's to you. It might have been that she was more exciting to Bill.
Yes, that's true. That is true. Well, according to M. William Phelps, who wrote a book about this case titled We Thought We Knew You, the closest clinical term for how Adam described Katie would be malingered psychosis. Those who malinger do it for two reasons: to avoid pain or seek pleasure. So it's a manipulative tactic used to justify immoral actions. I think that Katie obviously had trouble accepting losing or being rejected. A lot of us do. And her criminal and violent reactions to losing Adam may have given her some kind of pleasure or relief to get back at him because she believed she was wronged. The prosecutor even called her a woman scorned, and that what she had done was, a lot of it was just out of anger. She did have some behaviors that showed that she was probably mentally unwell. After her first breakup with Adam, she'd faked an ectopic pregnancy to try and get him back. And then I think she probably created that rape accusation before dropping the charges.
Yeah, but Adam still went back to her after that.
He did.
It wasn't until the third breakup that Katie poisoned Adam. And when that didn't work, she decided to go after his mother.
Well, that's what we think. That's what the prosecution set out.
That's the word.
Yeah. I'm not 100% convinced she did it, but pretty convinced, personally.
Yeah, I think I'll have to digest this some more. I'm a little bit on the fence still.
Sure. Well, I think there's good reason to be on the fence, and I think it'll be interesting to see what our listeners have for opinions on this.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's wrap it up. I want to thank Tristan Capel for our music. And just a reminder, if you have a case suggestion or comments or anything you want to tell us, just send us an email to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com, or go to our website and you can leave some comments there, or even better, you can record a voicemail. And your voicemail may be played on an upcoming episode, and we really love to hear people's voicemails. It's one of my favorite things. If you'd like to get all of your future TCB episodes without commercials and get our extra members-only episode each month, you might want to consider subscribing as a tie grabber on tiegrabber.com. And when you join, you get immediate access to all of our bonus episodes from the past 4 years, plus all of our other episodes without any advertisements. We also have a Patreon page where you can subscribe for ad-free and bonus content as well. If you're interested in that, just go to patreon.com/tiegrabber to learn more. One more thing, if you enjoy the show, we'd really appreciate you leaving us a review. You can do that on iTunes or wherever it is that you listen, and it takes a little bit of effort, but it really doesn't take more than 5 minutes or so, and we would really appreciate it. So what have you got for feedback, Dick?
I have 1 voicemail and 2 emails. The voicemail's from Natalie, and she has a comment on an episode we did.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Hi guys, this is Natalie from Hattiesburg, and I just thought I'd call in and just let you know that the episode titled Seaworthy, Murder on Palmyra, is definitely one of my favorite episodes you've done. I've actually listened to the audiobook that you mentioned in the resources by Vincent Bugliosi, and each time I heard him discuss Jennifer in the book, all I could think of was what Jill said about him sort of having a little crush on her. But the main thing I was wanting to discuss or mention is how more upset I get each time I listen to it, no matter how much I like the episode, about Mac's seemingly complete disregard for Muff's feelings about the trip. I mean, apart from her, having to get on medication and then that driving under the influence incident, I mean, what did that man need to see in her to show that she was afraid? I mean, was there no option for a compromise instead of saying we'll stay a whole year, maybe like a few months or something? I mean, he's dead. They both are obviously deceased, but at the same time, it's just seems like his hard-headedness, pig-headedness, contributed to this. And it just upsets me more every time how he just seemed to completely disregard her feelings, or maybe she didn't feel like her feelings were valid enough to say, try to rein him in a bit. I mean, they didn't deserve what happened to them, of course, but he seems like he didn't really have a lot of care about how she felt about everything, and it was all about him. It just really gets to me. Anyway, really love the episode. Remarkably has a lot of re-listenability to it. Again, thanks so much. Bye.
Well, thanks a lot, Natalie. And I am totally on board with you. It had to be Mac's way. And I don't think most people would have gone along with it. I think she was, I don't know, do you think she was that passive? Or did she love him more than he loved her? But it was totally all about him and what he wanted. And I don't think most people would have done that.
Well, it was all Mac's way.
She had to give up everything. And It was dangerous, obviously.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really shocked that she went along with it. And I do think he was very selfish. Very selfish.
Yeah, no question about that.
And I think probably there were some self-esteem issues with her that she felt she needed to go along with it. And I think it may have even said in the book that it was either go along with it or not be with him. He didn't really give her much of a choice of staying together and not going.
No.
He said he'd go alone. Yeah. But it was a long time to be apart for a couple. And yeah, of course, it's not his fault they were murdered, but he did really put her and himself in a very vulnerable position. And this never would have happened if he hadn't done that. There was a lot of his pride and selfishness involved, clearly.
Definitely.
You also see that mirrored a little bit in the murderer and his girlfriend, where everything had to be his way. And then it brings me back to Bill and how Mary became a chiropractor when Bill wanted to be a chiropractor.
See?
So you men, I don't know. Men. Ugh.
Yeah.
Boy.
The root of all evil.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Natalie.
Yes, that was a great voicemail. So we have an email. Why don't you read that for us?
This is from a person who's using the name Justice4. Could you please do a video on the Christine Kupka disappearance or possible murder case? It's a frustrating one. It happened in 1998, and all along the same person, Darshanand Rudy Persod, had been the only suspect in her disappearance or murder. Christine was about to graduate college with honors in philosophy and go on to law school to specialize in women's studies. At the time she disappeared, she was 5 months pregnant, and the father of the baby is that suspect, Rudy. He was her college chemistry professor. He insisted on her having an abortion once he found out she was pregnant, because he was married, which he neglected to tell Christine, and then Christine refused to have the abortion. So Rudy was the last person that was seen with her during the last sighting by witnesses. And yet we are here at 23 years later, and he's never been charged.
Wow. I think I've heard of this case before. Maybe someone else recommended it?
I'm not sure.
I don't know, but Dick's working on being more organized about who recommends what. We actually bought a dry erase board to put that on, so hopefully everyone will start getting credit for their recommendations. I feel like we missed quite a few, especially the older ones.
Yeah, but at the same time, you know who you are if you recommended it.
Well, sure, but everyone likes to be acknowledged. And I like to acknowledge the first person who recommends it.
Well, I'll try to do that.
So that's something we're working on.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion. Sounds like another guy who really sucked.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to read an email from Darlene. And Darlene wrote, I love your podcast. I've been listening for about a year and I'm hooked. I was new to podcasts. I listened to a few before yours, but I haven't listened to any others since I found you guys. And my husband would never be interested in listening to a podcast, but I told him about the beer reviews that you do, so he listened with me, and now he gets into the episodes too, which cracks me up. I listen anytime I'm in the car, and I always have to catch him up on what's going on in the story if he's missed anything. I have a case suggestion that happened near where I live, one town over. It's the murder of Courtney C. Coates in Alton, Illinois in 2013. She was murdered and dismembered by her live-in boyfriend and his friend. They dumped her remains near a bridge in Hardin, Illinois. My husband and I would love for you guys to do this case. It was actually my husband's idea, which I was pleasantly surprised about. Thank you guys for being so interesting, so awesome, and fun to listen to. Wow, thanks, Darlene.
Yeah, this looks like a fairly straightforward case, but I'll look a little bit more. Interesting. Dismembering. Jeez.
Yeah, so that's not that old. It happened, 8 years ago? And it is funny that your husband came up with it, Darlene. Good job getting him into the brewery.
You might watch your back, Darlene. No.
Nah. All right, so some great feedback. And I think we've gotten a couple more voicemails coming in since we begged last week. So hopefully next week we'll have a couple voicemails in our feedback segment as well.
Yeah, so get those voicemails going, folks.
We do like them. That's true.
Okay.
All right, so take care and we'll see you next time at the Quiet End.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.